Instagram, good morning. Hold on one second. Let's get Facebook rolling here. 3, 2, 1. All right, we're live on Instagram. We're live on Facebook. Good morning, folks. My name is Dustin Jones. Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show, brought to you by the Institute of Clinical Excellence. I am live inside of CrossFit Maximus in Lexington, Kentucky right now. Good morning, Brady. Jeff Musgrave, good morning, sir. How we doing, folks? I had an awesome weekend in Asheville, North Carolina. It was the first Modern Management of the Older Adult live course that we've had since March. So super excited to get back on the road and had some really good conversations that are going to kind of inform this discussion. Before we jump into it, I do want to mention it's Wednesday. That means it's Hump Day. Hump Day Hustle, the email at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time has just gone out. If you do not get that email, it's usually jam-packed with, at minimum, 5 solid links to help you clinically. You can get that at ptonice.com and then click on HDH. All right, so this weekend, Jeff Musgrave, he's watching live right now, and then Julie Brower helped teach this course, and we had a great conversation on Sunday. So Sunday morning is typically reserved for discussing psychosocial considerations when we are trying to serve older adults and thinking about some of the different ways that we can impact them that may go beyond the work that we may do in the clinic or in the hospital or in a particular setting. And a lot of that conversation revolved around the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, specifically in older adults, with a lot of these restrictions that have had a lot of negative consequences that we definitely have to acknowledge in terms of social isolation, reduced physical activity levels, increased rates of depression. A lot of issues are really boiling to the surface, especially in the older adult demographic, along with a lot of these restrictions. And the conversation was very eye-opening to me, and I think for several others. And we really need to think about what we can do creatively to really impact the quality of lives of the people that we're working with beyond some of the typical things that we do. And the conversation evolved to the discussion on life-space mobility. And it became very apparent that that is not a common term that many of the people in that classroom were aware of. So I wanted to speak to that today. So life-space mobility. Life-space mobility, if you were to define it, it's basically a person's functional mobility patterns over a period of time. And I think I had a very practical example of this this past week, that for those that use Google Maps a lot in terms of directions, but it's always tracking your information, whether you know it or not. But last year, every month you get kind of a review, like your Google Maps timeline of all the places that you visited, how many miles that you drove, also how many miles that you walked as well. And last year, we were traveling with courses and just all around the community, all around in my town, in my neighborhood, going to the gym a bunch, just pretty active lifestyle that I was going to a lot of different places. I had a pretty large life space, if you will. And then I got my September Google Maps monthly review, and it said that I only visited 2 places, the grocery store and then CrossFit Maximus, and that's it. So this big life space has kind of shrunk to a very, very small life space. That's a practical example for me. But for many of the people that we may work with, especially older adults, their life space may have been their entire home, maybe their garage, maybe going to the mailbox and back, maybe going to the grocery store, maybe going to the senior center, the church, or whatever it may be. And for many, that life space has now shrunk to maybe just their house. Maybe they're not leaving. Maybe they're not active in the community. Maybe they're not even able to go throughout their entire house. Maybe they're only limited to their bathroom, their bedroom, and their kitchen, for example. Now, why is that a big deal? Why is that a big deal? So if you look at the research on life space mobility, it is rather fascinating. So this term started, I believe it was around 1985. It's pretty prevalent in the occupational therapy literature, but they're starting to have a better way to actually track life space mobility objectively, with different activity trackers and GPS and things along those lines, and correlate it to particular outcomes of things that we are concerned about. So there's a recent, good morning, Alex. There's a recent a narrative review of the literature talking about life space mobility. I'm just going to read some of these of what life space mobility can predict. So life space mobility has been shown to be an independent variable in predicting cognitive decline over 4 years and 5 years of a follow-up, 90-day hospital readmission rates, exacerbations of COPD requiring ED and hospital admission, falls, mortality, quality of life, and admission to a nursing home. basically saying that if your life space mobility has decreased, which I think for the vast majority of us, but then also older adults, it has, that puts you at a greater risk of cognitive decline over 4 years, 90-day hospital readmission, COPD exacerbations, falls, mortality, quality of life, admission to a nursing home. That's a lot. That's pretty wild. And then this paper also stated that life space mobility could also be a valuable outcome measure in and of itself to see how effective a particular intervention is, because it has been correlated with so many of these other outcomes or things that we like to track. So life space mobility can give us a glimpse into someone's life, but also their future functional capacity. It can predict that as well, and their functional independence. So something that we want to have on our radar. In particular to you all, many of you all are in the outpatient, the orthopedic outpatient setting, and so many of you all are dealing with folks that are in pain. That's a primary driver for you all. That life space mobility has also been connected with kinesiophobia, or the fear of movement related to pain. So there was a recent randomized controlled trial that was looking at how rated kinesiophobia correlated to life space mobility. And they found that people that demonstrated higher fear of movement related to pain had decreased life space mobility. So the higher the fear of movement related to pain, the lower their life space mobility, and thus the higher risk of some of these issues related to functional decline, mortality, hospital readmission, all those types of things. So it's very, very important. Something that we definitely want to have a pulse on in some way, shape, or form. But it can be rather challenging, right? It can be rather challenging to really grasp what is going on in people's lives. How do you get their life space mobility in terms of some perspective of that? For someone that has worked in the home setting like myself, very easy to do. You can walk into someone's home. Typically what it looks like is the common living areas, different kind of nooks and crannies of the house have not been touched in probably months. There's probably one path that's going from their bedroom to maybe the living room, maybe to the bathroom and the kitchen. Typically you can tell what areas of the life are being lived in and what are not. And so what that is telling you that their life space has shrunk. Red flag goes up. You need to be able to increase their functional capacity to be able to occupy more of that space, because we know that is related to positive outcomes. For you all in the outpatient setting that can't get that perspective, it may be just a one-off comment of they stopped going to a community event, something that has been a big part of their life for so long, but they're not able to do anymore. Their life space is functionally shrunk down in that moment. It's easy to kind of pass this off, oh, not a big deal that they're not going to their weekly poker on Friday night, but that can be a big deal, and that can be the start of a slippery slope of functional decline down the road. So you need to have it on your radar. Let's talk about some clinical applications with life space mobility and what that could mean for you. So the first thing, we have to observe, but we also want to assess. And so there are actual life space mobility assessments that you can leverage. The most popular one is out of University of Alabama, Birmingham, called the Life Space Assessment. And it's basically a bunch of questions asking what people's life space has looked like in the past 3 days. So have you, been out of your bedroom? Have you been to the bathroom in the past 3 days? Have you walked to your kitchen? Have you walked out to your garage, for example, or out to your mailbox? Basically asking, have you been able to go to X, Y, and Z? And that has been validated. That has been shown that I don't remember the cutoff scores off the top of my head, but I'll put a link in the Facebook video so you can reference. But there's cutoff scores to show people that are at risk of some of these issues that we discussed before. So the UAB Life Space Assessment can be helpful. But whether you're in home health, in acute care, skilled nursing facility, outpatient, whatever, I think it would be helpful to look through this to see some of those example questions, because you can ask them as well and get a glimpse of how people are functioning, what is their life space mobility throughout their home and in their community that can give you a clue into a potential slippery slope of functional decline. So observe if you're able to. Home health clinicians, you have a great opportunity to do that, or assess. Second is we want to identify barriers. Sometimes the barriers to increasing life space mobility may be rather small, or they could be rather complex. I always think of this one individual that I had in Columbus, Ohio. This is a home health setting where they did not participate in all these community events that they traditionally participate in, like their church, like going to the grocery store, like some different weekly meals with some friends. And the biggest barrier to them being able to participate in those was they had a busted up rail on their front steps. And so I called the local area agency on aging, and they had a community grant that someone came out and was able to fix that railing at no cost to that patient. Such a simple intervention that likely dramatically impacted their life space mobility. And what's wild for me to think about is the best thing that I did for that patient was not the kettlebell goblet squats or the deadlifts or the loaded carries or the remoms or AMRAPs that we did to improve their capacity. It was the fact that they got a handrail. That was my best service to them. And I think that's perfectly fine and something that we need to think about. So identify those barriers. Associated with identifying the barriers to increasing life space, we need to know our resources. And this is where something like the Area Agency on Aging can be very, very helpful. If you have access to a medical social worker, they are the saints of the healthcare system. They are overworked and underpaid, and they have connections with all kinds of resources within your community to be able to connect. What's up, Nick? What's up, Chris? How we doing? That you want to establish some type of connection with them, whether it's just having their number in your phone or dropping in and saying, hey, I'm a home health or I'm an outpatient clinician. I just want to know what's available to some of the people that I work with. You will be shocked at some of the resources that are available to you and your patients as well, especially when you're in some of these bigger kind of metropolitan areas where they may have a little more funds to work with. So that is something that you want to be aware of to try and build that network. Whether it's something like railing, whether it's something like transportation assistance can be absolutely helpful, and even transportation to community centers or different group exercise activities. Those are at our disposal, and we often don't even know about it. So we want to be aware of our resources. And then the fourth thing, so observe or assess. We want to identify barriers. We want to know our resources. We also want to think about how we can incorporate our interventions with meaningful activities. And so this is where the value of making therapy meaningful to them, things that they care about, are very, very important. A good example is typically, I really geek out about, the deadlifts and the squats and the loaded carries and some of the capacity building activities that we'll often do, in physical therapy. At least if you've been through MMOA, you'll likely often do that. However, there may be some activities that I may push them to do that may be more meaningful to them. Christine always talks about dancing. That's a perfect example. I may not be the best dancer or want to dance with them, but they may have a strong passion for dancing. And if we can incorporate that into our sessions and ultimately get them back to the dance classes that they were participating with before, that is one. Gardening can be another one. Walking can be one for some. Whatever meaningful activity is for them, we want to really incorporate that into our session because the reality is, if we can get these people back into life, into being community-dwelling older adults, to being that active participant in the community, in these different activities that they were once a part of, that is likely going to dramatically increase their life space mobility, their physical activity levels, decrease some of the risks of the things I mentioned before, maybe more so than the tailored home exercise program that I give them that they likely won't perform. And I think we got to approach that with some humility, but we need to see the value in leveraging some of those meaningful activities for these folks to make a substantial change in their activity levels and their life space mobility. Which I don't want to admit that. I don't want to admit that my properly dosed evidence-based exercise program with some solid weights, doing deadlifts and squats and all that fun stuff may not be as effective as me focusing on getting them back into dance class, for example. So we need to think about that because life space mobility, obviously, with all this available research, is shown to be a very great indicator of someone's current functional independence, but also their future functional independence and overall health as well, and we want to acknowledge that. For those that kind of geek out on the step count literature, I really kind of put life space mobility in the same bucket as step count. There's some interesting research looking at if you're below 2,000 steps per day, you are at an increased risk of a hospital readmission, or 10,000 steps per day is kind of this this goal for so many individuals. Life-based mobility, I view it very similarly, but life-based mobility has a more holistic perspective, because you can get a whole lot of steps and not see another person. You can get a whole lot of steps and not necessarily participate in your community. But if you are increasing your life-based mobility, you're more likely going to be an active participant in your community that we know is very, very, very important for kind of that psychosocial component of health. So life-based mobility, I'll put the links to those articles that I mentioned, the narrative review, and also the one on kinesiophobia on the Facebook video. I'd love your all's thoughts. What have you observed related to life-based mobility? What have you done to increase people's life-based mobility to impact their lives? Whether you're in home health, SNF, acute care, outpatient, whatever. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So comment on either this Instagram video or the Facebook video, and I'd love to get a discussion going to see how we can practically apply this stuff. Before I leave, I do want to mention Modern Management of the Older Adult. The next course is going to be in Delaware, in Lindsay Huey's neck of the woods, just outside of Newark at Bear Fitness. It's going to be myself and Alex Germano. Cannot wait to get up there. If you want to drop by, we'd love to have you. If you have any questions about Modern Management of the Older Adult Live, hit us up. Our next online cohorts for Essential Foundations is going to be October 28th, so hop into that. That's starting to fill up. And Advanced Concepts won't kick off until 2021. So it's going to be a busy fall for us. Hope to see you all out, some of the courses or online. Otherwise, love to hear your thoughts on life-space mobility. You all have a good Wednesday. I'll talk to you soon.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.